In the Actelos Empire, they birth a whole bunch of heirs, but only the strongest can ascend to the throne. Basically, they kill each other until only one is left, and that survivor becomes the emperor. The emperor's youngest child, and the youngest participant in this bloody ritual, a 13-year-old prince, did away with all his siblings. He tied their hair together and dragged them before the old emperor. The emperor, moved by the young prince's power, was excitedly preparing to praise him, but a sword went straight through his chest. The young prince, before his blood-coughing father, smiled like an angel and said he had grown impatient. He wanted the throne immediately, and the fact that someone was above him annoyed him. And just like that, he became the current emperor of Actelos, Rhaenyra Actelos. Angelica was standing at the wedding altar with this very emperor by her side, as she had been sold as a bride to this tyrant. The priest told them to seal this ceremony with a kiss, and when she looked at Rhaenyra, she was shocked because he looked completely different. But then, he gave an extremely sinister smile, excited that Angelica had finally woken up because he was just about to get bored. In fact, this was all happening in a novel, and Angelica had just transmigrated into the scene of her marriage to the emperor. The novel's heroine, the goddess Seraphina, was like the ultimate flower blooming in the Actelos Empire. Before meeting the goddess, Emperor Rhaenyra was always plotting to conquer more lands. In Seraphina's clear eyes, he saw his own blood-soaked reflection and began to develop all sorts of complex and intense emotions for her, a mix of love and hate. Rhaenyra snatched her from the temple, dragged her back to the empire, and planned to make her just like him, but she only grew more radiant. The emperor's possessiveness went through the roof, and he did away with Seraphina's first love, the Night Eden. The goddess could no longer bear it and completely lost control, while Rhaenyra literally lost his head. There were other characters in the novel, but Angelica had transmigrated into the body of the empress, an almost ghost-like presence in the story. Because in the Actelos Empire, divorce is impossible. One can only remarry after their spouse kicks the bucket. The first thing Rhaenyra did after snatching the goddess from the temple was to cut off his wife's head. So, Angelica had transmigrated into the empress who gets beheaded right at the start of the story. She had read countless Isekai novels of this type, but usually the protagonist would possess the villainous and save themselves by not doing bad things. Seeing no other way, Angelica decided that on the day Rhaenyra goes to the temple, she would fake her own death and then escape this place. She was excited about this idea because the emperor wouldn't check if she was really dead. He was only killing her to make the goddess his wife. Until then, she decided to pretend she didn't exist at all and stay out of Rhaenyra's sight as much as possible. Angelica was so lost in thought that she didn't even notice the emperor suddenly standing right in front of her. He gave a wicked smile and asked how long she planned to pretend not to see him and ignore his imperial majesty. Angelica immediately replied that she would never dare to be so disrespectful to him. She took an awkward step back, accidentally stepped on the hem of her dress, and fell flat on her back. Although the fall was embarrassing, she was glad she had answered his question quickly, because Rhaenyra hated slowness. Some servants had even lost their heads for not dealing with things the emperor disliked quickly enough. Rhaenyra stepped on her dress, sneered, and gave the empress a chance to explain. Angelica tried to defend herself, making up a story about having a chronic illness that causes her to faint with her eyes open. Noticing he wasn't buying it, she added that Rhaenyra's aura was too powerful for a humble person like her to bear. When asked if it was his fault, she immediately changed her tune, explaining that if someone went blind from staring at the sun for too long, no one would blame the sun. The emperor wondered if she planned to avoid looking at him for the rest of her life, because she would faint. Angelica scrambled to come up with the right answer, asked for his permission to look at him, and then raised her eyes. Rhaenyra was pleased with the empress he had chosen. She showed no unnecessary pride, groveled before him, and answered quickly. He grabbed her by the throat and promised to answer any one question she asked as a reward. Angelica knew her life now depended on her question, because if he didn't like it, she was done for. She asked him why he chose her. Rhaenyra was very disappointed with the question, finding it dull, common, and cliché. The emperor worried that answering it would bore him to death, but Angelica had earned her boon, as he had promised her an answer. When Rhaenyra announced he was getting married, countless nobles and kings sent portraits of their daughters, filling up the entire damn room. He ordered the portraits to be hung on the wall, then plopped down on the ottoman at the foot of the bed and threw a dagger at them. Raniero found it amusing to recall that the knife had landed right in the left eye of Angelica's portrait and took back his words about the answer being boring. But his mood quickly shifted, and he lifted the girl's chin with the tip of his shoe, telling her to try harder, or he guaranteed he would kill her. Angelica assured him she would do better and become more interesting. Raniero left the room, and the girl collapsed right onto the floor, thankful to have survived her wedding day. And she wasn't dead. In the morning, Angelica woke up to the Emperor's hand caressing her body under the covers, and she shot up. Raniero was angry that she had slept until 9, calling her lazy. While getting dressed, he said she was common, boring, bland, and lifeless, then left the bedroom. A lady-in-waiting suggested the Empress start her morning with a bath, and the girl thought, all right. Since Raniero said she was boring and bland, she hoped he wouldn't come again. Angelica needed to find a way to escape, so she asked a lady-in-waiting for today's date. May 19th. The Emperor met Serafina at the Tunia Temple in the dead of winter, which meant her fate was about 7 months away. Until last night, the girl knew nothing about Angelica besides her name, but the memories of her body were slowly seeping into her mind. Angelica was the second princess of the Anro Kingdom. She had an older brother, an older sister, and a younger brother. She was a member of the royal family, so she should have learned the basics of history and geography, which could help her figure out where to run. The border of the country she was to escape to couldn't be too far from the imperial palace, nor could it be at war with the empire. The security there couldn't be too tight, and it didn't matter if the country was rich and powerful or small and weak. See, either way, once the emperor dies next spring, the entire country will fall apart. It was all built on him alone. While Angelica was eating, she noticed the ladies-in-waiting were all keeping their distance from her. She thought this was a good thing. She couldn't get attached, especially when she was planning to escape. That would only be asking for trouble. But first, she had to act normal and play the part of a good empress for the time being. She asked for the ladies-in-waiting's names. The older one said she was the mother of Marquis Jacques, and the younger one was Myron, the wife of Count Locke. Angelica was surprised they were both from such prominent families. She didn't understand why they were so uncomfortable around her. To ease the tension, she asked them to help her get familiar with the castle. The Empress inquired about her schedule and found there were no official plans for the day, so she could relax. Since Angelica had 7 months to kill, she decided to take the offer. But every day after that was the same. Now the girl understood why they were acting strangely. The ladies-in-waiting were avoiding her. It was too abnormal for an empress to have no schedule at all. While thinking about her next move, she remembered that her character, Angelica, had brought a lady-in-waiting named Sisson from her hometown. So the next morning over tea, the Empress asked the Marchioness where she was and why she hadn't seen her. According to the Marchioness, Sisson was undergoing training to become a proper Actelos lady-in-waiting. Angelica didn't mind the lady-in-waiting being trained, but she found it strange that she, as her mistress, knew nothing about it. The Marchioness had assumed that if the Empress didn't ask about Sisson, it meant she was already aware. Realizing she was dealing with a very cunning person, Angelica decided to change tactics, apologizing and admitting she had messed up. Knowing this was feeding the other's ambition rather than satisfying her pride, the girl decided to swallow her pride, smile, and ask again if she could see Sisson. The Marchioness Jacques, sitting with her son at home, was furious because the Empress wasn't as stupid as she initially thought. The woman was angry that a chit of a girl from a small kingdom dared to talk back to her. Her daughter Sylvia, drawn by the noise, entered the room, wondering what was going on. The Marchioness was convinced she wouldn't be suffering like this if Sylvia had become the Empress. She lamented that her family had missed Sylvia's marriageable age, waiting for the Emperor to choose her. Sylvia pleaded with her mother not to hate Angelica so much. That was the Emperor's choice, and asked her brother to say something too. But the Marchioness wouldn't listen, raging that she had waited so long for nothing and belittling her own daughter. Unable to stand her aggressiveness, Sylvia ran out of the room in tears. The Marquis told his mother not to get too worked up. As the Vice Minister of Finance, and being close to the Emperor, he was sure the Emperor would get rid of his wife if they gave him a good enough reason. Realizing they just needed an excuse, the Jacques mother and son decided to whisper Angelica's flaws into the Emperor's ear at the right time. Because Raniero had a rule, anything that could harm the state would be destroyed immediately, and all they needed was a little push. The country was now in its budget approval period, where funds for all institutions required dual approval from both the emperor and the empress. But Angelica was completely neglecting her duties, and anyone could see this was harming the prosperity of Actelos. Things were quiet for a few days after Sissin's return. That lady-in-waiting really knew her boss. Although the head lady-in-waiting, the Marchioness Jacques, had been giving the empress the cold shoulder, she had decided to ignore it. But now Angelica realized that was a mistake. The emperor had summoned her, and it must have been that lady-in-waiting's doing. Angelica didn't know who was coming with them to see Raniero, so just in case, she bowed lower than the others. It turned out to be the Marchioness Jacques, who had brought the third-quarter budget proposal to the emperor. The Marquis raised an issue regarding the funding for the empress's palace. Raniero was impressed with Angelica's nerve, as he thought she had approved too much money for her own palace. But then the Marquis dropped a bombshell. The empress wasn't managing the palace at all. According to him, she had been throwing parties. She had no interest in fulfilling her duties, and they had found someone else who had been handling things for her. Angelica now understood that the Marchioness had been deliberately excluding her to set up this whole sham. So, according to the Marquis, on top of everything, there were also some entertainment expenses. Although the officials pretended not to notice, he just couldn't stand by and do nothing. Even though the guy was spouting nonsense, the girl had no way to prove she wasn't lying. The Marquis had kept Angelica cooped up all this time, and Sissin was the only one in the palace who could really speak for her. When the emperor asked Jacques what he wanted now, the guy said he had no ulterior motives. He went on about his loyalty to the imperial family, leaving all decisions to Raniero himself. The girl couldn't believe these guys were trying to fool the emperor with such a lame excuse. Angelica saw Raniero's expression and, as if silently pleading, she tried to come up with something before the emperor got bored and flew into a rage. She said it broke her heart to see the emperor troubled by such routine matters as budget items that she could have handled. To apologize to the emperor, she offered to give him something interesting, something that would cheer Raniero up. As the emperor looked at her with interest, Angelica suggested a small human hunt. The girl proposed that all three of them be the prey, which completely terrified the Jacques family. Human hunting was mentioned in the book, and Angelica knew Raniero would definitely love the idea. But she needed to save her own skin, so she reminded the emperor of her chronic illness. Angelica explained that hunting her would be like hunting a sick rabbit, not worth the effort at all. When asked if she was trying to get out of being hunted, she promised to train herself to become a worthy prey by winter. The Marquis was furious with Angelica, saying her idea was complete garbage, a stupid suggestion. The girl seized the initiative, accusing Jacques of not telling her about the budget in the first place. So, since the emperor had wasted so much time on this routine matter, the Marquis should be honored to become prey. The girl's speech ended with Raniero's applause, as he was clearly pleased to have her as his empress. The Marquis begged him not to subject his old mother to such a cruel fate and to just take him as prey. The emperor decreed that it was not cruelty, but the honor of being hunted for his amusement. Raniero snapped his fingers to call the guards and agreed with Angelica that all three were guilty. In his view, the empress was guilty of failing to stop the Marquis and his mother from bothering him, and they were guilty for trying to use the emperor to settle a personal grudge against the empress. Raniero had long suspected something like this might happen, as the Marquis's sister had not been chosen as his bride. He knew it all from the beginning, but let it happen because he had no reason to care about such petty greed. Raniero wondered if Sylvia could have been that kind of empress, approached Angelica, lifted her chin to kiss her, and pointed out that she had made no mistake. He pulled her into his arms and asked if she could avoid them forever. The next day, the situation in the Empress's palace changed. The Marchioness became prey and lost her position as head lady-in-waiting. The position was a burden to the ladies-in-waiting of the empire, and Sissin got the job. After the head lady-in-waiting was removed and all the crap that happened in the palace, no one looked down on the Empress anymore. Since Angelica didn't participate in social events, people began to see her as a cold and arrogant empress. Although the rumors annoyed her, she threw herself into her duties as empress and was swamped with work. One day, as Angelica was leaving the castle, she saw a girl standing in the courtyard and wondered who she was. A servant told her it was Sylvia, the younger sister of Henry Jacques from the human hunt incident. Apparently, the girl had come to the castle to request an audience with the empress. Angelica was confused as to why Sylvia was only showing up now, considering her family's fate had been sealed days ago. Apparently, the girl had been standing there for days since the sentence was passed. Angelica agreed to see Sylvia. The girl respectfully introduced herself. The empress apologized for keeping her waiting, but immediately made it clear that she could not overturn the punishment. But to her surprise, the girl stated bluntly that her family got what they deserved. Sylvia knelt before Angelica and begged to be hired, saying that now that her foolish mother was gone, there was a vacancy for a lady-in-waiting. The empress couldn't understand why the child of her enemy would want to work for her. Perhaps she was planning to lie in wait, observe her, and bide her time for the perfect moment to avenge her mother and brother. Sylvia explained that they had raised her to be either the emperor's companion or the empress's lady-in-waiting and ally. She had been cooped up for most of her life without any influence, and now that her family had fallen and become prey, she had nowhere to go. Of course, Sylvia was heartbroken for her family. I mean, they were still family despite how they treated her. But the girl held back her tears and confessed that, first and foremost, she just wanted to live. Lying in bed before sleep, Angelica thought that the only person who wouldn't be moved by Sylvia's performance was Raniero. But this wasn't a situation where a decision could be made based on sympathy. There was a high chance the girl hated her. Angelica got out of bed and went to the balcony for some fresh air to clear her head. Suddenly, Raniero appeared before her, and she screamed in fright. Angelica asked, "What are you doing here?" But the emperor didn't think he needed a reason to visit his own wife. He asked how her day was, and then gushed about how excited he was to see his prey begin their training. Raniero decided to spice things up by adding 2 rules. Give the prey weapons, and if they survive for 3 hours, they're free. The emperor asked again how Angelica's day was, and she was about to tell him about Sylvia. Before she could get a word out, Raniero said, "Just accept the girl. It'll be fun." He suggested sending Sylvia to the hunting ground as a hunter to kill her mother and brother to prove her loyalty to Angelica. The empress was surprised at how easily he saw through her reason for hesitating, but to him, the doubts of ordinary people were obvious. Raniero proposed taking the girl as a lady-in-waiting, but only if she could first serve as a hunter. Angelica agreed, but seeing her hesitation, the emperor handed her a glass of wine and promised to give Sylvia the order himself. He sneered, thinking the empress was too weak to even give such an order herself. Raniero Actelos was born a man, but he was closer to a god, viewing humans as ants. There was no tragic backstory that made him so cruel. He was just born pure evil. Suddenly, he splashed the entire glass of wine he had offered Angelica on her, calling her unbelievably cowardly. The emperor suggested she forget her fear for a moment while indulging in pleasure. This absolute ruler, an incarnation of evil more beautiful and powerful than anyone, grabbed her and threw her onto the bed. Raniero lay down beside her and commented that Angelica was far too weak to be good prey. She remembered her promise to the emperor, but in truth, she had no desire to become prey at all. She would bide her time, and when Raniero went off to war, she would escape, and by the time he met Serafina, he wouldn't even bother to look for her. The emperor had just remembered the second rule he added for the hunt. He wanted Angelica to participate as a hunter as well. Raniero thought she had nothing to worry about, because prey can't harm hunters, right? It's the rule. But Angelica was sure that the cornered Jacques mother and son would drag her down with them if they got the chance. And even though Raniero came up with all these rules, he himself knew very well that they were useless. The hunt was set for the summer solstice, less than a month away. Angelica had planned to get on good terms with the nobles before then, but survival came first, so she canceled all her social events. As a hunter, she was allowed to check on the prey's training at the parade ground. In the Actelos Empire, everyone learned martial arts, so women and children could also join the fight if things went south. According to Angelica's lady-in-waiting, Duchess Nirma, the Jacques mother and son had been slacking off in their training until yesterday. But after the emperor visited them, everything changed, and he probably told them the new rules. They were looking for the best teacher for Angelica, and she wanted to learn how to shoot. If she got into close combat range, she was a goner, so she needed to keep her distance from her targets. The empress asked Nirma to teach her how to use the weapon with the longest range. After starting her archery training, Angelica complained that the bow was too heavy, which surprised the lady-in-waiting, as even children could hold it. She pulled herself together, picked up the bow, and aimed at the target, hoping to at least get close to the bullseye. The Emperor summoned Sylvia to talk about her wanting to be Angelica's lady-in-waiting. He told her the condition. She had to be a hunter at the summer solstice festival. Rhaenyra, disappointed that she didn't show the surprise he expected, ordered the guards to take Sylvia away. The Emperor learned from his aide that Angelica had canceled all her social events to focus on learning archery. He sneered, calling her a coward, and then learned that she had fainted. Angelica woke up in bed, muttering to herself. She thought being a princess would at least come with some stamina training. Rhaenyra appeared out of nowhere, confused, asking why she spoke as if she didn't remember her own childhood. Hearing that the Emperor had come to see her after she fainted, Angelica thanked him for his concern. Rhaenyra, seeing her face was still pale, thought she was an idiot for not knowing when to rest when she was tired. Seriously, did no one in this country understand that people could be weak? Angelica started to cry, explaining to Rhaenyra that she knew she needed to rest, but she was just trying desperately not to die. He sneered, declared that the Empress would not die, and ordered a lady-in-waiting to bring cold water and a towel. Rhaenyra placed the towel on Angelica's forehead, but he quickly grew tired of taking care of her and called for a lady-in-waiting to help. Seeing the Emperor sprawled in his chair, she sensed danger. His movements were filled with boredom. Angelica asked the Duchess to bring some food, and 10 minutes later, Rhaenyra was feeding the Empress, shocked at how little she ate. The Emperor needed her to train hard and not become easy prey. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to hunt her in the winter. In the Empress's opinion, this was exactly why she was looking for a top-tier training instructor. When he found out that Angelica hadn't found a coach yet, he decided to train her himself. She gratefully accepted his offer and promised to work hard to become a skilled hunter. Waking up in the morning, the Empress felt much better. The potion Rhaenyra had given her was indeed very effective. He had given her a medicine that made her fall into a deep sleep and stayed by her side all night, only leaving at dawn. Angelica asked Saizen when the Emperor had summoned her to the training grounds, and when the handmaiden replied that she didn't know, she was furious. To avoid angering him by being late, she hastily got ready and rushed to the training grounds. She had just breathed a sigh of relief that the Emperor hadn't arrived, yet when she heard his displeased voice from behind her about her waking up late. Rhaenyra was surprised by her bow, which looked like a child's toy, but she explained that she didn't have the strength to draw the bowstring yet. The Emperor handed her a bow that was perfectly suited to her physique, and it felt lighter and more comfortable than the last one. After an hour of training, Rhaenyra had probably declared for the 67th time that Angelica would likely die from the same damn attack. Half an hour of target practice bored the Emperor, so he picked up a wooden sword and began to teach her fencing. He skipped the theory and basics, jumping straight into high-intensity training, pointing out all the girl's weaknesses. Angelica was knocked to the ground again and again, while the Emperor was puzzled as to why she could never dodge his attacks. She explained that perhaps the problem wasn't her, but that Rhaenyra was simply too fast. In the end, the Emperor actually started to explain the fundamentals of combat to Angelica. While complaining that she was too slow, he showed no intention of ending the training. Angelica couldn't understand why Rhaenyra, who was bored with everything, would tirelessly train her. She thanked him for the training and promised to keep trying, even if it took time. The Emperor paused, then suddenly patted her on the head. No matter how vast the Actelos Empire was, rumors spread like wildfire. An official announcement hadn't even been made, yet the nobles were already buzzing about the hunting festival. Rumor had it that after Angelica fainted, the Emperor showed her great concern, and later even waited for 2 hours at the training grounds to personally train her. This gossip was naturally spread by the handmaidens, but it actually benefited the Empress, solidifying her position. Then again, for someone planning to escape, being the center of high society's attention was a hassle. But for now, showing a good relationship with the Emperor was a must, especially to prevent another Jack from appearing. To show their support for the Empress, gifts poured in for her from all over the Empire, and even from abroad. Angelica heard that the construction of the hunting grounds would be completed in 4 days, and she would soon be able to inspect them. She knew that no matter how how hard she tried, it would be difficult to defeat Jack's mother and child. Therefore, Angelica wanted to gather as much intelligence as possible to gain an advantage in this battle. As Rhaenyra continued the training, he began to lose faith in the human brain. Angelica gradually lost confidence in her swordsmanship and thought it would be better to focus on running training. The Emperor paused for a moment, then decided to take her on a tour of the hunting grounds. Seeing the prepared grounds, Angelica was once again struck by the grand scale of everything Rhaenyra did. From the towers, one could get an excellent view and a real advantage with a bow. The Emperor wanted her to know that he had gone to great lengths for her comfort, and she was grateful for it. After that, Angelica met with Rhaenyra every morning to practice archery. Then she would stay up late preparing for the summer solstice festival. Although she was worried that she hadn't seen Sylvia since that day, the Empress was too busy to spare a thought for anything else. One morning, Rhaenyra brought Angelica a dress, wanting her to wear it at the party, provided she didn't die in the hunt. Well, the summer solstice had finally arrived, and the hunt was this afternoon. Angelica walked up to the Emperor's throne and asked Rhaenyra if she was late. He smiled, saying he had been waiting for 2 hours, then grabbed her hand and pulled her onto his lap, the two of them sitting like a loving newlywed couple. Together, they studied Angelica's hunting route. The festival was declared open, and Rhaenyra took her hand to greet the crowd. The banquet began, but Angelica was too nervous to swallow anything. Rhaenyra pushed a cup towards her, its contents different from what was in his own cup, and told her to drink it all. He whispered in her ear for her to drink it in one go, and Angelica obediently drained the cup. She was terrified, not knowing what was in the drink, as her limbs suddenly began to burn. Rhaenyra told her to hold on, and soon she would see things from a whole new perspective. She suddenly burst out laughing, and when she saw everyone staring at her, she told them to enjoy the food. Suddenly, Angelica's appetite returned with a vengeance. She feasted, and the food tasted much more delicious than usual. After drinking the concoction, everything fell off. Her body switched between feeling light and fiery and as heavy as lead. But instead of panicking, she was filled with anticipation for the hunt. As she was getting ready, Rhaenyra gave her a gift, a pure, concentrated poison extracted from the Sorio poison dart frog. The Emperor's meaning was clear. She knew what to do with it. The Empress came out, and the guests cheered in unison. But Angelica was disappointed because they couldn't see anything clearly through the fence. She scanned the hunting grounds for her target and then found Sylvia standing right next to her. Sylvia was trembling with nervousness, just repeating to herself that everything would be all right. The pity Angelica had felt a few weeks ago while looking at Sylvia kneeling there now felt like a complete sham. If she completed this task, she would be rewarded, but if she messed up, it would all be for nothing. The Emperor appeared, insisting that Angelica would not die, but still evading the question of what had been put in her drink. The hunt was declared open, and the Empress couldn't wait to enter the grounds. Angelica coated her arrowheads with the poison Rhaenyra had given her, took her position in a watchtower, and focused on listening to the sound around her. Suddenly, she heard the sound of trampling below, but when she raised her bow to aim, she saw it was Sylvia. The girl wanted to say something to Angelica, but just then, Marchioness Jexu appeared from behind her and grabbed her daughter's hair. Her eyes glinted maliciously, anticipating digging out Sylvia's heart to offer to the Emperor. The woman hoped this would win Rhaenyra's favor. Angelica aimed at her from the tower, and the Empress fired an arrow, but it missed. The Marchioness spotted the direction the arrow came from and glared at her with a look of pure hatred. While her mother was distracted, Sylvia lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. The girl grabbed a rock from the ground, pinned the Marchioness down, and, as if possessed by the will to survive, smashed it into her head again and again. As Angelica descended from the tower, she thought it was a pity Rhaenyra couldn't see this. Sylvia knelt before the Empress and suggested they claim the prize for themselves. Angelica told the girl she was proud of her, then drew her dagger and slit the Marchioness's throat. Just then, Henri Jacques emerged from the woods, stunned by his mother's death. The Empress aimed at the Marquis, who was trembling with rage. The arrow went wide, but grazed his shoulder. Suddenly, Angelica felt a sharp, tearing pain in her muscles, and she collapsed to the ground. Henry was swinging an axe at the girl, but Raniero suddenly appeared behind him and ran him through with his sword. He approached Angelica, smiling as he explained the potion she had drunk. It allows you to break your physical limits, boosts morale, and eliminates fear. But the strain on the body is too great, and the effects wear off suddenly, so it cannot be used in war. Raniero took a sip of a painkiller, then kissed Angelica, passing the medicine to her mouth to mouth. The pain gradually subsided, and the Emperor showed the girl the prey she had captured. He grinned and announced that a reception would be held that evening for the newly crowned Empress. Stepping onto the castle balcony, Raniero announced to the crowd that Angelica had captured her own prey with her own hands. The people knelt before the Emperor and Empress, and the girl was once again convinced that the people of this country worshipped strength. The celebratory evening began, and upon entering the hall, Angelica took her seat beside Raniero. Since the Emperor had to dance the first dance at the ball, he and Angelica stood up to dance. Suddenly, the girl felt herself lose her balance and was about to fall, but she did not take Raniero's outstretched hand. She fell heavily to the floor, but the Emperor laughed because even in this situation, she had not made a mistake. For if she had taken his outstretched hand, it would have been tantamount to touching his body without permission, which was unacceptable. To Angelica's surprise, Raniero bent down, lifted her into his arms, and placed her back on the throne. Sylvia came forward to greet the Emperor and Empress, and the guests began to whisper that the girl was shameless. A nobleman demanded that the Marquis's daughter be thrown out of the palace hall. But Angelica pointed out that the girl had sacrificed her own mother to prove her loyalty. The Empress suggested that Sylvia might even be more loyal than he, the Emperor's right-hand man. Hearing her arrogant words, Raniero began to laugh out loud. He found her attitude interesting and amusing. Following the Emperor's lead, everyone present also began to laugh, and Angelica felt they were all forcing their smiles like puppets. Sylvia turned to the Emperor and asked for the reward he had promised her. As he had promised, Raniero appointed the girl as the Empress's handmaiden, for which she expressed her gratitude. In truth, she could have received the position after the ball, but Sylvia had deliberately brought it up publicly in front of the nobles. By receiving the appointment directly from Raniero himself, she proved that she was now the Empress's person and that no one could mess with her. After socializing with the crowd, an exhausted Angelica went to the courtyard and sat by a fountain. The girl jumped up when she saw the Emperor approaching. He approached her with a flower, saying she looked as if nothing had happened, even though she had just killed someone. He said that a weak person would be terrified now after killing someone. He placed the flower in her hair. In fact, even if it was self-defense, Angelica was now a murderer. But she understood that feeling guilty wouldn't change anything. She thanked Raniero for appearing in time and getting rid of Henry. Otherwise, she would have been dead. The Emperor had drugged Angelica to make her put on a good show with her actions. Although Raniero knew about the side effects, he felt no guilt as everything was proceeding step by step according to his plan. But he couldn't guess how the Empress would react, whether she would feel guilty or be so scared she'd just run away. But then, Angelica, whom he thought would not attend the banquet, appeared as if nothing had happened, wearing the dress Raniero had given her. In that moment, he felt a thrill of excitement, as if he were seeing her face for the first time. The Emperor found it all very strange. He gave her a gentle smile, extended his hand to Angelica, and asked her to go back. Upon entering the palace, the girl was surprised because Raniero was leading her to his private area in the castle. They entered a huge room, a secret chamber known only to the Emperor, where even servants were forbidden. Raniero took off his shirt, walked over to the stunned Angelica, and kissed her. Then he slipped into a hot pool in the room and called for the girl to join him. Angelica dipped her toes in the water, wondering why the Emperor would show her this place that no one else knew about. Fed up with her shyness, Raniero grabbed her leg and pulled her into the water. She was completely flustered, not knowing what to do. When the Emperor called her Angie and said she could touch him, she hugged him. Raniero carried Angelica to the bed, and they spent the night together. she fell asleep, and the emperor thought that she had become bolder since he hadn't given her permission to sleep. Now, the empress was a recognized figure in Actelos, and from tomorrow, everyone would treat her differently. After all, for her to defeat an experienced Actelos martial artist with only a month of training meant she had immense potential. Suddenly, in her sleep, Angelica began to groan, sounding as if she were suffocating. Rhaenyra lifted her head and gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, then kissed her, but she bit his lip in her sleep. The empress opened her eyes with tears streaming down her face. She had dreamed that the severed head of her prey was chasing her with an axe. The emperor usually handled correspondence in the morning, had a full afternoon of meetings, and did physical training in the evening. Angelica stood by his desk, wondering if she could slip away during one of the state meetings. Having breakfast in the main palace was extremely awkward for Angelica, especially with the emperor staring at her with that heavy, gloomy gaze. She asked if she could go home after breakfast, but Rhaenyra just smiled and said, "This is your home now." She tried to laugh it off, saying she wasn't fully awake yet, but the emperor thought Angelica had slept just fine. Besides, she needed to return to her wing of the palace, as Sylvia was supposed to arrive at the empress's palace today. Angelica noticed the cut on Rhaenyra's lip, and when he told her she had done it, she couldn't believe it. If she had really hurt the emperor, she would have been dead by now. He agreed, then pointed out how grave her sin was, and she had to face the consequences. Since the empress wanted to return to her domain, Rhaenyra decided her punishment would be that he wouldn't let her go. The emperor usually handled correspondence in the morning, had a full afternoon of meetings, and did physical training in the evening. Angelica stood by his desk, wondering if she could slip away during one of the state meetings. Noticing her standing, Rhaenyra ordered a servant to bring a chair so the empress could sit beside him. The emperor tore open another envelope and found a letter from the Tunia Shrine. The Tunia Shrine, an abandoned temple in the barren northwest. The letter spoke of the few remaining followers of the God of Mercy, who had given all the fertile land to the world, leaving only barren lands for their descendants. Currently, some tensions were brewing between Actelos and the Kingdom of Sambinia. Rhaenyra was bored of reading these cookie-cutter pleas for help. He turned to Angelica and saw that she had fallen asleep again, so he went over and shook her shoulder to wake her. After waking up, she said she felt bad just sitting there and asked if she could at least read the letters. The ones he had already seen. I mean, yes, the empress had the right to know how state affairs were progressing, but Rhaenyra thought it was too soon. He ignored her question, turned away, and continued his work in silence, while Angelica wondered what he could be angry about. The emperor found her frightened and confused look so amusing that he decided to play along. So Rhaenyra dragged Angelica around all day, to lunch, to meetings, and even to his evening training session. Only after all that was over was the empress finally able to get away and return to her quarters, where her handmaidens fussed over her. She had planned to throw a party for Sylvia becoming a handmaiden, but Rhaenyra had ruined it. Today, Duchess Nerima told Angelica that she was impressed by yesterday's hunt. She said Her Majesty was now the mother of the nation, sincerely loved by all, and they were all eager to see her. It was the perfect time for Angelica to re-host her postponed party, and Nerima confessed that she had spread a rumor in high society. She revealed that everyone needed to show their sincerity to the Empress in advance. However, according to Nerima, not everyone would get the chance to see the ruler at the beginning of next month. Once Angelica was familiar with the daily affairs of the court, she would be ready for her debut. She would then manage the affairs of the entire imperial household, and the handmaidens were ready to help her in any way they could. She had just dealt with the summer solstice, and now she had to deal with more new troubles. In the midst of all this madness, she had no idea how or when she would be able to carry out the escape plan. The party was held 15 days later, and Angelica had been training with Duchess Nerima. The days flew by. The girl had been memorizing the names of all the nobles in the capital, their family ties, and the ins and outs of their businesses. Rhaenyra found her studying, snatched the book from Angelica's hands, and commented coolly on her fascinating reading material. He plopped down on the bed, declared that the Empress was being forced to do meaningless, stupid things, and tossed the book aside. The Emperor explained that in her position, all she needed to do was lift her chin and speak with an arrogant smirk. She didn't have to know, nor want to know the names of the people addressing her. but she would deign to listen to them. Raniero suggested that Angelica simply dominate everything. After all, she was the emperor's wife. He couldn't see why she couldn't just use his methods and start acting like him. Raniero advised Angelica that if she couldn't take his advice, she should start by learning to keep a straight face. A week later, on the day of the ball, Saizen told Nerima they needed to postpone the event. Her Majesty's cycle was irregular, and she was suffering from severe pain, especially on the first day. The handmaidens began to argue about whether to proceed with the event, but Angelica cut them off. She decided not to postpone the ball and asked for some painkillers. The empress gritted her teeth through the excruciating pain and prepared to face the nobles. She appeared before her waiting guests, thanked them for coming, and hoped they would be proud of this opportunity and forever think about what they could do for the empire. Tonight's ball featured noble women and ladies handpicked by Duchess Nerima, an ambitious woman. Suddenly, Angelica realized with horror that she couldn't remember all the names and family trees at all. She wondered what Raniero would do in this situation and remembered his advice. The guests froze when the empress announced that she had absolutely no idea who they were or what they did. Angelica picked a girl from the crowd and arrogantly told her to stand up and try to give a quick and concise account of her life story. The empress felt bad for Duchess Nerima, but she couldn't damage her image by showing weakness. One by one, the guests began to introduce themselves, and she smiled, saying she was glad to meet them. You could tell Nerima was angry that the social event was not going the way she had planned. Angelica asked her why the handmaiden was glaring at her, instead of being concerned about the empress's health. The duchess apologized, claiming she didn't mean it. Nerima was a very shrewd person, so the empress needed to set some boundaries to prevent her from getting too close. Suddenly, the guests all greeted the emperor who had walked in, which caught Angelica completely off guard. He turned to the crowd, swept the girl into his arms, and announced that he was taking her away from his party. Raniero figured his wife would rather be with him than be bored to death with these people. His actions were a complete slap in the face to the bewildered guests and the handmaidens who had to clean up the mess. It was a bit shocking and strange, especially since this was the first time Angelica was genuinely happy to see her husband. He ran into Sylvia and told her the empress was unwell, refusing her offer to see her to her room, saying he would take her himself. Angelica felt that the emperor was becoming more and more gentle with her. Every day, Sylvia left to get some painkillers, while Raniero pulled a chair to the bedside and sat with her. He felt that Angelica must be very full of herself to appear before everyone in that state. She apologized, and Raniero said she was lucky it was a room full of fools. Angelica jumped up, remembering the time for the state meeting. It turned out Raniero hadn't gone to the meeting, feeling it wasn't worth a lengthy discussion. She asked what today's topic was, and found out the meeting was about the Tunia Shrine, a real backwater with no influence. Not even Actelos cared about its mountains. The novel said that Tunia always pleaded with the two great powers, Actelos and Sambinia, to calm down and live in harmony. Raniero said that it was the season for demonic beasts to hatch from their eggs in that region, and it was time to exterminate them. The emperor thought it was ridiculous that they were asking for mercy while callously destroying things. Angelica hoped Raniero would participate in this expedition, as he loved a bloodbath, but he was hesitant about it. The emperor suggested that if that girl was willing to come and beg at his feet personally, he might show some mercy. Angelica wondered what would happen if the shrine sent an envoy and Serafina was one of them. She tried to shake off the thought, because if things went according to the original story, the goddess wouldn't appear and she and Raniero wouldn't meet until winter. But what if Serafina's arrival was moved up, just like her own relationship with Raniero, which was much closer than expected even after all this time? That social event was never held, because the Empress's mind was completely focused on the Tunia Temple. Although Angelica knew Serafina wouldn't come, she couldn't stop worrying and kept gathering information about the temple, because if those two met ahead of schedule, the novel's plot would be fast-forwarded, and she would be dead before she even made it to winter. Suddenly, Angelica stumbled upon some information about the Saintess of Tunia, who was the Order's most precious treasure. Apparently, this Saintess never left the mountain range where the temple was located and had zero contact with the outside world. But that was all the information Angelica could find. Although she was vaguely aware that this girl named Tunia had a certain influence, the book had far more stories about the demonic beasts. It turned out that the mountain people of Tunia would hunt those demonic beasts during times of severe food shortages. When the demonic beast breeding season began, the adult beasts would start attacking human villages in their rush to find food. If Rhaenyra went to subjugate those demonic beasts, he would meet Serafina while crossing the mountains. Therefore, Angelica decided she needed to follow the Emperor on this extermination mission. If it turned out that Rhaenyra was to meet the goddess then, she would have to flee immediately on the day the temple delegation arrived. The day of the temple delegation's arrival came, and Angelica was a nervous wreck. Rhaenyra ran into her in the hallway and asked the Empress why she hadn't eaten breakfast. She was afraid she'd get indigestion from her nerves, so she admitted she felt terrible. Rhaenyra's reaction was to tell her to just skip meeting the envoys. Angelica hurriedly grabbed the Emperor's sleeve and, after apologizing, pleaded with him to let her meet them. Rhaenyra agreed, and they headed to the grand hall set up for meeting the delegation. Angelica was shocked to find that the Archbishop himself had traveled all the way from Tunia for the audience. Besides him, standing before the Emperor and Empress was also the temple's holy knight, Eden, Serafina's first love. The Ridge Holy Knights recruited the strongest warriors who fought against the demonic beasts. Well, although Eden wasn't a major character, he rose quickly with his natural talent for martial arts and was a rising star. In the original story, because Serafina couldn't stop thinking about him, Rhaenyra killed him outright. The Emperor wanted to know if these beggars had brought a tribute worthy of his help. Before the Archbishop could answer, Rhaenyra cut him off, saying he would mercifully refuse their tribute. Instead, he ordered them to kneel and beg him to save them. If these envoys didn't obey the Emperor now, they would have no choice but to return, and the temple's strength alone was far from enough. The Archbishop was still hesitating, but Eden stepped forward and knelt before Rhaenyra, and the others followed suit. The Emperor began to chuckle, and Angelica thought to herself that he was a complete and utter scumbag. After the meeting, the girl found it strange that Eden had actually knelt. After all, in the original work, he was described as a righteous knight with a rebellious spirit who wouldn't bow to things he believed were wrong. Angelica overheard some ladies-in-waiting gushing about Eden's training, saying they were even more impressed by him than by the Emperor. Since the temple's envoys were to stay in Actilis for 9 days, the Empress felt she should entertain her guests properly. On her way, she ran into Rhaenyra, who was tired of talking to the Archbishop and just wanted to hug her. Angelica told him she was on her way to make arrangements for the upcoming banquet. But the Emperor had already arranged everything, so she didn't need to worry about it and could go straight back to her palace. Rhaenyra walked with Angelica, curious as to why she had been so interested in the temple lately. Recently, she had given up her previous passion for high society studies and was now gathering information about Tunia in the library. Even when she wasn't feeling well, she had said she wanted to see the delegation. You see, the Empress's home country, the kingdom of Onro, and the temple's ridge were far apart, and they had no reason to trade with each other. Angelica asked Rhaenyra who he planned to seat at the banquet, and he asked her in return how she would arrange it. In her opinion, the Archbishop, the captain of the knights, and the 2 elderly priests should be seated according to rank. But the Emperor thought arranging the guests like that was terribly boring. In fact, Angelica didn't really know who was important besides them, as she had never met these people. 2 months ago, such an answer would have bored Rhaenyra to death, but now he thought she wanted to sit across from that night at the banquet. He sat on the bed and called Angelica over. He was pleased by her obedience, but also wished she would have taken the initiative to come closer to him first. After that day, the Empress ordered Saizen to watch Eden, and now the lady-in-waiting was reporting her findings. It turned out that Eden had been taking a book from the library, hiding it under his clothes, and then sneaking off to a deserted place. Angelica decided to investigate in person and had Saizen make arrangements so she wouldn't have to attend the training session. On the appointed day, the Empress sent Nirma to watch the training with everyone else. The Duchess refused, saying her mistress was unwell and she couldn't leave her alone. Angelica made a show of it, telling her that having Saizen with her was enough and basically ordering her to go and have fun. She told all her ladies-in-waiting to go and report back on who won. Nirma finally relented. The Empress asked Saizen if anyone was in the library now, and after getting a reply, she reassured her worried lady-in-waiting. She headed towards the library, peeking from behind the bushes to watch the path Eden would take if he came for the book again. Angelica guessed right, because before long, the knight appeared, walking past her without noticing at all. She jumped out from her hiding spot, stopped Eden, and told him that whatever he was looking for, he wouldn't find it. He explained that he wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing, because he really liked books. Angelica pressed him for his name, but he insisted he only went by the name Eden. The girl, worried she had messed up, said that if he didn't answer again, she would just leave. The man stared at her and suddenly admitted his real name was Chester. Angelica realized she had guessed correctly and asked him about the book they were both apparently trapped in. It turned out they had both been thrown into this novel on the exact same day, May 18th. The girl, who had always thought she was the only one this had happened to, suddenly burst into tears and confessed that she had ordered a lady-in-waiting to follow him. The guy was thrilled to see her, as he had never imagined someone else was in the same situation. Now he understood how Angelica had figured it all out. His behavior was a huge departure from the novel she had read. Since time was short, the girl got straight to the point and asked Eden what book he had been reading in the library. He said it was a book about forbidden magic, because he thought that was how he had been transported to this world. Angelica had read tons of novels in the genre, where dimensional travel was the selling point. So she had never considered it from that angle, nor had she bothered to dig into why and how she got here. Judging from her words, Eden felt the Emperor was not one of them, the transmigrators. If that were true, she would be overjoyed because Rhaenyra was just as twisted as in the original, and every day felt like walking a tightrope. Eden couldn't figure out why he and Angelica were here, especially since they were both just side characters who died in the original story. This guy was planning to give up on magic and then go home, back to where he used to live. But Angelica knew that most otherworld protagonists never actually returned to their original worlds. Rhaenyra watched the friendly match with utter boredom, occasionally glancing at Angelica's empty throne. He'd had enough, stood up, and headed for the Empress's palace, where a flustered Sizen greeted him. Rhaenyra burst into Angelica's room, walked to the bed, and yanked off the covers, only to find she wasn't there. A fierce glint flashed in his eyes as he told the lady-in-waiting, who was about to defend her mistress, to shut her damn mouth. Rhaenyra noticed that one knight was missing from the training, and Angelica also happened to be absent on the pretext of being sick. The girl asked Chester if he had seen Seraphina, since he lived at the Tunia temple. The guy admitted he barely knew her, as he had been avoiding her like the plague. Angelica was confused by this. Their memories were supposed to be inherited, so Eden should have known Seraphina. Chester confessed that the real problem was that the guy's feelings were so intense that he was hit with a powerful shock. But even based on just a chaotic impression, he felt that Eden actually hated Seraphina. Angelica was stunned. She had always thought the knight and the goddess had mutual feelings for each other. Chester explained that Eden always put rules and morals first, and he believed it was completely wrong for a saintess to be infatuated with a holy knight. So he planned to go on a mission to exterminate the demonic beasts, wanting to check the grand library in the abandoned temple. Normal channels were no longer useful, so he was raising the stakes, even though it was right on the border between the demonic beasts and humans. Angelica promised she would do her best to search the Imperial Library. If she found anything, she would go to Tunia to find him. He was surprised that she was also going on a subjugation mission. To avoid trouble, they decided to make it quick, as it was best for Angelica to be back before the friendly match ended. The girl was relieved to have returned alive and well as she entered her palace. But then she froze because Rhaenyra was waiting for her, sitting on a chair in the middle of the room. With a malicious smirk, the Emperor asked why she had gone for a walk if she was feeling unwell. Angelica explained that she had gone out for some fresh air because her headache was so bad. She noticed her hands were trembling, and Rhaenyra didn't miss it either. She said she was scared of his fierce gaze. The Emperor wanted to know if she had met that knight, which Angelica denied, asking if he was really suspecting her of something. Rhaenyra was surprised. Had he gone soft? He was furious that those two had specifically both been absent from training today. Even if his little wife liked that guy, he had no reason to be angry, because it was impossible for the Emperor to be jealous of an insect like her. Angelica started to cry, admitting she couldn't lie to the Emperor. Rhaenyra knelt on one knee and pulled the girl in his arms, completely taking her by surprise. But she looked so fragile, and he knew that getting angry would only scare her again. The Emperor said he wasn't angry. That was the first time Rhaenyra had managed to completely fool Angelica. In this relationship where neither party knew much about the other, a subtle shift began to occur. As soon as the Emperor left, Angelica finally let out her emotions. She had been so scared, thinking it was all over. She couldn't believe he had gotten that angry just because she was missing. She was nothing more than a worthless trophy to him. There had to be another reason. So, she decided to stick close to Rhaenyra for the time being. The Emperor chatted with the knights, his wife by his side, as Eden and Angelica pretended they were strangers. The girl, eager to end the conversation, asked Rhaenyra to leave, and he suddenly embraced her gently. When the Emperor asked how everyone had slept, one knight replied that they all had a comfortable and peaceful night. Rhaenyra stroked Angelica's hair, wondering to himself if the knights liked the food here. Eden was overwhelmed to see the Emperor's affection, especially after she had told him he was just as crazy as in the original story. Angelica was also surprised and weirded out by Rhaenyra, who suddenly decided to kiss the Empress in front of everyone. While kissing her, he watched Eden from under his brow, and Eden was very uncomfortable with his gaze. She asked him to stop, saying the knights needed to leave, and Rhaenyra agreed, letting everyone know that she was apparently eager to be alone with him. Now Angelica was sure the Emperor was suspicious, because he had definitely been glaring at Eden with a fierce look just now. She sent a letter to the knight through Sai-Zin, asking what they should do, since the Emperor might have caught on to their conversation. Receiving Chester's reply that he didn't think so, Angelica was annoyed, as the guy wasn't particularly bright. Looking at her mistress, Sai-Zin thought about how much she had changed since her days in the kingdom of Onro. When it was decided that she would be sent to the Actolus Empire for a political marriage, Sai-Zin had felt sorry for the princess who couldn't stop crying. The lady-in-waiting had given up marriage to live abroad, but now Angelica, the Empress, felt like a different person. Sai-Zin decided to voice her concerns to her mistress, but before she could, Angelica cut her off. She realized her lady-in-waiting thought she had a crush on the knight from the Tunia Temple. She felt bad for making Sai-Zin doubt her, but she assured her that things were not as they seemed. The girl, with tears in her eyes, asked Angelica why she hadn't told her anything, as this had never happened before. Seeing her tears, the Empress revealed that she had no feelings for the knight, but that her interest lay with the saintess of the Tunia Temple. Still, Sai-Zin didn't understand why Angelica chose to ask Eden about the saintess, as she could have just spoken to the Archbishop directly. The Empress replied that she did so because she thought Eden had no friends at all, and she felt that someone who didn't belong in the temple would reveal more than the Archbishop. Relieved by Angelica's explanation, Sai-Zin dried her tears and apologized for misunderstanding her in the first place. The Empress claimed she had absolutely no intention of betraying her husband, and Rhaenyra, who was standing outside the door, heard every word. He smirked, knowing that Angelica was very close to her lady-in-waiting, so he was sure she had been telling the truth just now. Sai-Zin was happy to see the harmony between the couple. Not long ago, her mistress had cried and refused to marry, and now she had adapted so well and become a respected empress. Angelica admitted it was tough, but she thought His Majesty was being quite good to her. Hearing this, Rhaenyra smiled again, while Sai-Zin expressed her hope that the Empress would grow to love the country more over time. Angelica hoped so too, unless, of course, she died during the winter hunt. The Emperor found it amusing that the girl was worried about the winter hunt, as he had completely forgotten about it. Remembering Angelica's interest in the Temple Saintess, he thought it wouldn't be a bad idea to meet her when he went on the expedition. That night, Rhaenyra lay with his head in the Empress's lap, noticing she was in a good mood. The girl pointed out that it was because the Emperor's good temper made her happy. They both laughed at Angelica's clumsiness, as she just didn't get the joke. Rhaenyra placed her hand on his head, and she instinctively began to stroke his hair. The Emperor asked what else Angelica liked, and she thought to herself, since when did you care what I like? The Empress decided to ask Rhaenyra if she could accompany him on the demonic beast extermination expedition. She knew it was a strange request, as she was usually a coward and was now asking to jump into danger. But then Rhaenyra surprised her by smiling and agreeing, saying that if she wanted to follow him, then she should go. Angelica was stunned. She had never seen that expression on the Emperor's face. He was always depicted as a demon, and she had always felt he had a demonic aura. But at this moment his face was so innocent and bright that she reached out and gently touched his cheek. Angelica knew she couldn't let her guard down, that this guy could turn on her at any moment, but he pulled her into a tight embrace. She knew he was emotionally unstable and that tomorrow he would be back to the Rhaenyra she knew, but for now, she hugged him back. But the next day came, and contrary to Angelica's expectations, the emperor did not change back. The archbishop thanked his majesty for his hospitality, during which the members of the delegation were able to rest comfortably. After seeing the envoys off, the emperor smiled and embraced Angelica again. The girl was stunned. How did the terrifying Rhaenyra actualist suddenly start acting like a romance novel male-led? Objectively, it was a good thing that he was being friendly, but Angelica couldn't take it seriously. When they married in the spring, he had hated even being touched, and now he kept asking her what she liked. Lying in bed, she wondered if she could escape before Rhaenyra lost interest in her. Meanwhile, the emperor, sipping his wine, wondered why she wouldn't just tell him what she liked. A few days ago, after overhearing Angelica's conversation with her lady-in-waiting, a strong desire had taken root in him. He had seen her smile only a handful of times, and he longed to see her truly radiant smile. He realized he wanted to possess this woman, and he wanted to make her fall in love with him. Angelica was in the library, and seeing the leaves falling outside, she was reminded that she would be leaving for the expedition in a week. She had gone through almost every book on magic, but found no records of people from other worlds. It seemed Eden was right. There was no other way but to check the abandoned grand archives of the sanctuary. Rhaenyra walked into the library, sat down next to Angelica, and asked if there was anything in particular she hoped to find on the expedition. When she said she wasn't looking for anything special, the emperor asked about the saintess who never left the Tunia temple. She flinched. She didn't understand why Rhaenyra was so interested. Did he want to meet Seraphina? The emperor was taken aback by her reaction. He thought Angelica would be happy that he was talking about something she cared about. He smiled and asked what the big deal was if he did want to meet the saintess. But she suddenly tried to dissuade him. He asked, "Why does everyone want to talk me out of it?" Angelica said that Seraphina was stunningly beautiful, and that could be a problem for her. He said, "Who do you think you are, trying to possess me?" She was terrified and tried to take back what she said, saying he had completely misunderstood. But then Rhaenyra just laughed. He actually liked that Angelica was showing possessiveness towards him. 10 days later, the demonic beast extermination expedition began. Rhaenyra was on horseback, but even though Angelica could ride, he had put her in a carriage. The empress only brought Saizen and Sylvia as her attendants. The fewer people, the easier it would be to escape if things went south. People said that Angelica had snatched Sylvia as a trophy, so when Angelica's status rose, Sylvia's plummeted. Even if the empress misbehaved, the lady-in-waiting couldn't tell anyone, because no one would listen to the one-sided story of a powerless woman. After 3 days of travel, the carriage door opened, and Rhaenyra ordered Angelica to get out. The camp hadn't been set up yet, so she didn't know why he was calling her out. He took her hand and asked if she liked beautiful things, and when she said yes, he led her to a place deep in the woods. Rhaenyra said, "Seriously, you little things find shiny stuff beautiful." Angelica was stunned, struck by the incredible beauty before her, the ground illuminated by starlight and covered in glowing flowers. She couldn't believe the emperor had found such a magical place, and he told her to smile if she liked it. It was like a dream, and she walked towards Rhaenyra, stood on her tiptoes, and gave him a hug. He kissed her gently, calling her name softly and tenderly a few times. Rhaenyra pulled Angelica down to the ground, and she realized that if he had brought her here just to make her smile, then he actually cared about her. Finally arriving in Tunia, a bishop greeted the emperor, who ordered him to prepare beds for everyone. Rhaenyra would provide food and clothes for his men, but he wanted them to find a place for him and his wife to stay. Riding along the Tunia Temple mountain range, Angelica thought the nearby villages looked completely deserted. You would think people would be lining the streets to watch the massive procession enter the town, but no one even bothered to look. For the first time, the empress realized that people saw Actilus as a terrifying presence. Rhaenyra arranged a meeting with the captain of the Holy Knights and asked Angelica if she wanted to join. She turned him down, and the emperor looked dejected, patting her on the head as he left. Rhaenyra had really changed, and Angelica could only accept that the guy was truly smitten with her. But who knew? Maybe everything would change when he met Seraphina, so she had to be on her guard. Angelica had Saizen fetch a large sum of money, but she didn't want to run away just yet. Just then, Eden quietly approached her from behind, covered her mouth with his hand, and held up a finger, signaling her not to scream. He let go, apologizing for scaring her, and Angelica asked him where Serafina was and if she could see her. But Eden had already made sure that was impossible, as he would also be in trouble if the original story started too early. He had suggested to the Archbishop that Serafina be sent on a pilgrimage, thinking that a visit from the Saintess could help the people who were worried about the subjugation campaign. Angelica was thrilled by his quick thinking and then told him she hadn't been able to find the book she needed. You see, there were no written records of this world's existence, not even stories of souls entering other people's bodies. Although Eden thought going to that abandoned library was the only thing they could do, Angelica decided to keep her doubts to herself. She said His Majesty wanted her to go with him, so she would accompany the Emperor on the punitive expedition. Angelica confessed to Eden that she felt Rhaenyra was interested in her, but Eden was not surprised by this. He had known for a long time, but this troubled Angelica because it completely deviated from the original plot. Eden asked her if she would still stay even if Rhaenyra wasn't interested in her. At the mention of meeting Serafina, Angelica fell silent. Just as she was about to speak, Eden interrupted her, believing her silence was answer enough. She felt embarrassed for acting this way in front of Eden, getting so worked up just because Rhaenyra was interested in her. Eden took her hand and said that if she wanted to stay, he could understand, as life here might suit her better than her original world. Angelica assured him that even if she decided to stay, she would definitely help him go back. Eden smiled and told her it would be better if they went their separate ways and never saw each other again. Sitting at the dining table, Angelica wondered if Rhaenyra would still care for her after all this, or if he would fall for Serafina at first sight. She wasn't sure if she could guarantee she wouldn't be disappointed in him, even if they overcame all obstacles. Looking at the narrow bed prepared just for her, Angelica couldn't help but think that she was already starting to regret it. Did she really want to stay here? Because frankly, her life in her original world wasn't great either. She was destitute, with cheap books as her only solace, and didn't even have a single friend. Meanwhile, Angelica was a well-educated princess who grew up with love and had a loyal friend like Saizen. But since there was no guarantee Rhaenyra would love her forever, from a rational perspective, her best option was to leave. Just then, the Emperor appeared at the door with food, bringing it for Angelica. Since she had missed dinner, he sat beside her and began to feed her. She noticed that Rhaenyra had brought all her favorite things. Angelica wished him good luck for tomorrow, but thought to herself that she couldn't fully accept him until she was no longer so afraid of him. After she finished eating, Rhaenyra noticed how narrow the bed was. The bed was barely big enough for one person. He moved closer to Angelica and started to kiss her, but feeling like her heart was about to explode, she suddenly pushed him away. Rhaenyra looked at her in surprise, and the expression on his face stunned her. She couldn't believe she had just rejected the touch of a man who had likely never been rejected in his entire life. Knowing she had to fix it before he got angry, Angelica pretended she was just joking. She apologized for messing up and pleaded with him not to be angry, but Rhaenyra calmly told her that he wasn't. He gently pulled her closer, telling her not to be scared and not to cry. Her heart pounded, unable to believe that Rhaenyra wasn't angry at all. He had her sit on his lap and told her to relax and get some sleep as she was tired from the journey. A girl wearing a veil approached Angelica. She handed her a tray, and when she opened it, the Empress saw a severed head, thought it was Jack's, and dropped the tray in horror. The head rolled out, and it was Eden, who asked Angelica if she was going to stay here. She recoiled in fear, realizing the veiled girl was Serafina, who was watching her silently and coldly. She fled from Serafina and ran straight into the arms of Rhaenyra, who was right there, and he called her his winter trophy. Serafina seemed to want to say something to Angelica, but she couldn't make out the words. She heard someone calling her name, and opening her eyes, she saw the Emperor looking at her with concern, telling her to wake up. Angelica realized she'd had a nightmare, and strangely, in the dream, she had almost wanted to walk towards death. When she looked in the mirror this morning, she finally understood why Rhaenyra had grabbed her wrist so hard. If he hadn't stopped her, the mark on her neck would have been much worse. Today was the day they were heading to the temple, so Angelica decided to get ready and try to forget the nightmare. She went to the courtyard to chat with the bishop when Rhaenyra came over and asked if she was ready to leave with them. It turned out the trip would take the group 2 weeks because although the temple was close, they had to eliminate magical beasts along the way. But on second thought, if Angelica stayed here, she would have plenty of time to explore the grand cathedral without worrying about Rhaenyra watching over her. So she explained that she would only slow them down and told them she had decided to stay. She took Rhaenyra's hand, saying she wanted to finish everything here as soon as possible so they could return to the Imperial Palace together. He turned away, pulling his hand from hers, and promised to return as soon as he could. Afterwards, Angelica asked the Archbishop for permission to visit the temple she had read about so many times, once it was cleared. The knights were about to set off, and Eden noticed the Emperor's face was dark with anger. Eden was surprised to find that Rhaenyra was irritated because the Empress wasn't accompanying him on the monster hunt. He couldn't believe Angelica had the Emperor so wrapped around her finger that she could directly defy him. He was a completely different person now, nothing like the man described in the book. Just then, a horde of magical beasts charged at the knights, and they watched as Rhaenyra annihilated the entire group. In the blink of an eye, one of the beasts was still struggling, but the Emperor drew his sword again and finished it with a single swing. The more Angelica pushed him away, the more something deep inside Rhaenyra awakened. The group arrived at the temple and found it surrounded by the beast's eggs. With a wicked smile, Rhaenyra asked the knights if they had ever seen a magical beast hatch. He ordered them to kill the young, capture the mothers alive, but not to touch the eggs. Eden thought the Emperor was insane. In this bloody massacre, he wasn't just slaughtering the beasts, but also gleefully stealing their eggs. When a knight asked why they didn't just smash the eggs now, Rhaenyra said that would be no fun. A soldier reported to the Emperor that one of the young had hatched, but he hadn't killed it. The little one didn't attack, probably thinking the knight was its mother, which Rhaenyra found hilarious. He ordered all the eggs to be collected and guarded, while Eden wondered who the real monster was here. While waiting for the changing of the guard, Eden checked the eggs and figured they wouldn't hatch anytime soon, so he decided to scout around. He went into the library, but was disappointed as it was much smaller than he had imagined. But then, Eden found a small stone door in the wall, slightly ajar, leading to another extremely narrow passage. He realized he couldn't squeeze through the passage, and just then, he noticed something carved on the doorknob. The inscription read, "When the blood of Actilla is ready, open with the sword of Tunia." This must be referring to the blood of Rhaenyra Actilos, the godson of Actilla. But Eden knew nothing about this sword of Tunia, as no such holy relic existed. He decided to go to the archives to look for related documents, and just then, someone called out to him from behind. The knight asked Eden what he was staring at the blank wall for, since there was nothing there, and then they left. The day after the punitive force left, news arrived that they had reclaimed the Holy Temple. This was faster than expected. Angelica heard that the first group of injured knights had returned and rushed to the infirmary, seeing their terrible wounds. The Empress realized the operation to eliminate the magical beasts had been unusually brutal. The knight pointed out that the battle wasn't difficult, but he was confused by Rhaenyra's tactics. The Emperor had stolen the beast's eggs, and after they hatched, the young ones treated the knights as their parents. Then Rhaenyra ordered the knights to feed the hungry young with the flesh of their mothers. Hearing this, the medicine bottle in Sylvia's hand fell to the floor, and she trembled all over as she knelt to pick it up. Angelica had Saizen look after the infirmary, then went out to bring water to the knights, asking Sylvia to come along. The Empress was worried about the lady-in-waiting, but didn't know how to make her rest, as it would be a humiliation for a native of Actilos. Suddenly, the girl asked Angelica why she cared so much for her, the daughter of a traitor who was completely unworthy. Sylvia confessed that hearing about the magical beasts reminded her of how she had killed her own mother during a hunt in order to survive. Angelica stroked the girl's shoulder, telling her to say no more. With tears in her eyes, Sylvia leaned on the Empress's shoulder. The heroine smiled, because Sylvia showing weakness in front of her meant she completely trusted her mistress. The next day, Angelica visited the reclaimed Holy Temple, accompanied by the Archbishop. The Empress asked if she could look through the books stored there, and the bishop agreed. She was horrified to discover that Chester was wrong. All the forbidden books had been moved, leaving only those that were safe for outsiders. After that, Angelica began to frequent the abandoned temple. She went every day. Reading those books was a pain. I mean, there weren't many to begin with, and most were tattered with faded writing. The Empress was standing by a bookshelf when suddenly, a book fell as if on its own, landing on the shelf next to her. Angelica picked up the book and froze in shock. It was the very novel she had been transported into. She flipped through the pages and found that the plot seemed different from what she remembered. According to the novel, the godson of the war god plundered the Temple of Mercy, and the Knights of Actelos were caught in a storm and had to retreat. Seraphina heard the voice of a god, saying that an important guest was about to arrive. She waited for them. Angelica read the part where the Empress was murdered and began to feel sick. Perhaps it was because after spending months with Raniero, reading the original work again, the story just fell off. Then, Angelica found a note from the author, as if it were written especially for her. According to the author, if the world he created had unchangeable rules, then the godson of Attila had no choice but to become obsessed with the Saintess of Tunia. Even if the characters around them changed and relationships became a mess, Raniero had to meet Seraphina and fall in love with her, no matter what. Angelica thought that maybe it was better for her to dump the Emperor, and just then, with a thud, someone tapped her on the shoulder. It startled her. She turned around and saw Raniero, who had returned much earlier than scheduled. He asked her what book she was reading, and when she said it was the Code of Canon Law, he said, "Wait, I could have sworn I heard you cursing under your breath when I came in." Raniero started flipping through the book, and Angelica was terrified, not knowing how to explain any of this. Suddenly, he turned to her and asked if she was messing with him, calling this a code of law because all he saw was a blank slate. He handed the book back to a completely bewildered Angelica and walked out of the temple, asking if she remembered what she had said 10 days ago. He took her hand, and she couldn't believe the Emperor had returned early because of what she said about going home. Sitting on Raniero's lap in her room, Angelica asked him how the expedition went. The Emperor told her how he had fed the young with their mothers and lamented that she had missed the spectacle. Angelica couldn't sleep that night. Now that she knew Raniero was interested in her, running away became much more difficult. She couldn't deceive him like before, and if she suddenly became distant, he would surely get suspicious. Before he left for the winter expedition, she had to play the part of a loving girlfriend so he wouldn't think she would abandon the person she loved. The next morning, what do you know, they were already packing to return. Angelica was frantic because now she had no time to talk to Chester about the book. The Empress had no choice but to entrust this task to Saizen. She timed it so Raniero would surely overhear, called her lady-in-waiting, and asked her to return the book she had accidentally taken from the temple. After giving her instructions, the Emperor embraced Angelica, excited that they were finally going home. Saizen found Eden and asked him to return the book the Empress had taken from the temple. The lady-in-waiting also handed over the money they had brought and said the escape was set for December. Eden found a note from Angelica tucked inside the book, which said there was a hidden message that Raniero had missed, but the knight couldn't see anything either. Eden asked her to tell the Empress the pages were blank, and then the lady-in-waiting suddenly asked about his relationship with Angelica. The girl didn't understand why the Empress would run away with him. If their relationship was innocent, why run away in December? Eden was just as confused, as Angelica had decided to escape after all because he had thought she was planning to stay in Actelos. Seeing that he couldn't get anything out of Saizen, he explained that the Empress had made this decision because they had received a prophecy that the Emperor would kill them both. The lady-in-waiting finally understood why her mistress had been sending her to Eden so often. Saizen returned to Angelica and reported on her conversation with the knight. Now that she knew about the prophecy, the lady-in-waiting understood the Empress's choice. Angelica learned that Eden, just like Raniero, saw only blank pages in the book. Saizen also mentioned a secret door in the temple that a knight had discovered while checking the library. The lady-in-waiting went to check on the Empress's belongings, while Angelica wondered why Eden couldn't see the contents of the book and how she had missed the door. In any case, there was no time to think about it, as she and Raniero were returning to Actelos. Although life in Actelos was fairly peaceful after returning from the beast's subjugation, Angelica was plagued by nightmares. Each time, Raniero would wake her and ask what she dreamed about, but she obviously kept it a secret. The Emperor knew she was lying, but for some reason, he didn't press her, simply holding her and comforting her. Angelica noticed that Raniero had become gentler lately, especially when she showed him even the slightest bit of affection. She asked if she could visit the mansion they were preparing for the change of seasons tomorrow, and he said yes, as long as she returned before sunset. Saizen returned home, where the servants greeted her, worried that she had been too quiet lately. The lady-in-waiting asked the butler how he could remain so calm when his mistress came home in a bad mood. The man simply said that everyone else needed to be calm, and then returned to his room. Watching Daniel leave, the lady-in-waiting thought he was a unique person. He was the only servant with his own room, spoke elegantly, and carried himself with dignity. She even suspected he might be some bankrupt noble, hiding here, but no one knew the truth. He was once a top paladin of the Tunia Temple, and the queen's most trusted confidant had gone independent to keep him by her side. All the servants in the mansion had no connection to the imperial palace, a smokescreen put up to avoid suspicion. No one would guess that the empress, a lady-in-waiting, and an exiled paladin were secretly plotting an escape. When Eden told Angelica, through sighs in, that he was coming to Actelos, she couldn't for the life of her figure out how he managed it. In the temple, the knight had confessed his sin, his love for the saintess, and was nearly exiled for it. Angelica realized just how desperate Chester was to return to their original world, that he didn't care at all about his reputation or status here. Lately, the Empress's mental state had clearly weakened due to this planned escape. But Raniero, knowing she was plagued by nightmares, didn't ask Angelica for an explanation no matter what she did. He didn't even grow suspicious of her acting independently through sighs in, so she felt he wouldn't suspect a thing. Arriving at the lady-in-waiting's home, Angelica sat on the living room sofa while the girl drew the curtains. Eden entered the room with a tray and greeted the Empress, whom he hadn't seen in a while. To his comment about how tired Angelica looked, she replied that Raniero's expedition was starting soon. The man confessed that he hadn't told her everything about the door he had found. Eden had wanted to tell her everything in person after he figured it all out, but he wanted to talk about something else first. Raniero was so protective of Angelica that he thought the Emperor might want to take her with him on the winter expedition. But the Empress didn't think so, as Raniero knew she hadn't been well since returning from the monster subjugation. Before the Emperor left on his expedition, she would tell him she needed to go receive treatment. He wouldn't stop her. Once Raniero left the palace, the escape plan would begin. But Angelica hadn't decided where they would go. All countries bordering Actelos had tightened their border security, so crossing would be a hassle. A Raniero distracted by Serafina might not look for Angelica at all, but the lord of the territory she chose for her recuperation was another matter. If they found the Empress, they would immediately send her back to the palace. Therefore, Eden thought they needed to go somewhere close to the border and on relaxed terms with Actelos. He suggested she go to the Tunia Temple for recuperation, which made Angelica furious, as Raniero would be going there too. Eden told her to calm down, as they had to go to the temple anyway, given that the door was in the old holy temple. Angelica understood that he was suggesting they go to the temple before the Emperor arrived. Eden was betting that the priests who served the god of mercy wouldn't turn them in for hiding there. He told the Empress about the inscription carved on the temple doorknob. Eden had spent a long time thinking about which sword it referred to, and he had just figured it out. The girl also realized it immediately. The sword of Tunia was most likely Serafina, as her sword pierced Raniero in the original story. So they needed to find the Saintess before the Emperor did, so that after seeing the blood of Actilla, they could take her to the secret room to open the door and find out what was behind it. The thought of this blood of Actilla depressed Angelica, feeling that Raniero had to die no matter what. Eden wasn't sure if he had to die, but there would be bloodshed regardless. Noticing Angelica's concern, he asked if this bothered her. Although Raniero was called the godson of Actilla, he was actually considered an equal to the god, because unlike the god of Tunia, blood was the only way to communicate with the god of Actilla. There was no temple and no scripture. Angelica was afraid her denial would be seen as a lie, but she still said that her own life was what mattered most to her. Eden thought how bad the Empress was at lying, still believing she had feelings for Raniero. The only way she wouldn't be found out was to pretend she was deliberately acting. She told Eden not to worry, because she knew her own life was what mattered most. He thought that time would tell whether this was a love born of necessity or an excuse she told herself. Angelica decided to ask Eden if he came from a wealthy family, or at least lived comfortably, because perhaps his past life was like heaven, while her current situation was very difficult. Therefore, she asked Eden to remember this, and pointed out that her hesitation was because going back wasn't as wonderful for her as it was for him. In about a month, if all went according to plan, Raniero would be heading to the Sambinia Kingdom for an expedition. Seeing the Empress studying a map of the region, region. Sylvia told her that the journey there would take about 3 weeks. The lady-in-waiting found it hard to believe that Angelica was just looking at the map for no reason. The Emperor walked in, wanting to know what they were talking about. Angelica told Rhaenyra she was studying the map to understand the situation. He had her sit at the table and asked her to share her thoughts on the region. In her opinion, winter was a terrible time for armed conflict. Angelica pointed to the Sambinia region at the foot of the mountains, which was basically the only passage connecting them to Actilos. If Actilos could use it as a stronghold, it would be like handing our soldiers over to Sambinia. Angelica knew it would be difficult to station a large army in that remote place during winter, and Rhaenyra was impressed that she knew so much. She pointed out that common sense dictates that war doesn't happen in winter, even if the border is weaker than usual. But if we take the opportunity to tear down the walls and level the mountains to create a wider path, Actilos could defeat Sambinia's armies one by one. The people of Actilos are born strong and resilient, so by advancing in winter, we have a high chance of a major victory. Rhaenyra admitted that he had been waiting for years, tracking the weather and waiting for the perfect moment. He bet that if this winter was like the last 10, the land would become Actilos' territory. The problem was, Rhaenyra had never talked to Angelica about this, so he wondered how she knew so much. She explained that she figured it out by thinking like the Emperor, putting herself in his shoes. He showed Angelica the planned route, scheduled to begin in early December. When she sadly mentioned that he would be busy soon, he asked if he shouldn't go then. She opened her arms to hug him, assuring him she would be fine and just asking him to come back quickly. Rhaenyra confessed that he wanted to take Angelica with him, but she reminded him that she had gotten sick after the last expedition. The expedition route the Emperor showed today was golden intelligence. Saizen would take it out of the palace and deliver it straight to Eden's room. The Emperor overheard the idle chatter of the ladies-in-waiting and learned from Angelica that the Duchess of Nerima was pregnant. Without a word of congratulations, Rhaenyra kicked everyone out of the Empress's room and collapsed on her bed. Hearing Angelica's excitement that Nerima was finally pregnant, the Emperor wondered if she wanted a child too. He pointed out that if she were to have children, she would need to have a whole bunch of them for the Ectris trial. Angelica asked if her children would have to kill each other until only one remained. After receiving an affirmative answer, she thought to herself that her child could then kill Rhaenyra, just as he had killed the previous emperor. But the Emperor was certain no one could kill him, because Ectris would weed out the weak, even if they were infants. Angelica wondered if she, too, could be eliminated, but Rhaenyra said she was family, and only he could decide her fate. If anyone other than him were to take his wife's life, they would pay the price for their insane audacity. Sylvia overheard other ladies-in-waiting gossiping about how inseparable the Emperor and Empress were. Now that the Emperor was back with Angelica, no one would come looking for the on-duty lady-in-waiting until sunrise. So Sylvia knew this was her chance, and she had to act immediately. The head lady-in-waiting was acting unconventionally, moving her residence outside the palace, which felt suspicious. Therefore, Sylvia decided to go to Saizen's residence to investigate, but when she arrived, she realized she was already too late. She stood in front of the house and saw a light in the window, and then Eden suddenly walked up to it. Although the new hairstyle might have fooled some, Sylvia recognized him as that knight. He was from the Tunian Temple. Eden drew the curtains, quickly knocked on Saizen's door, and told her that one of the Empress's ladies-in-waiting was outside. He realized they were in trouble, because when they made eye contact, it was clear Sylvia knew who he was. Eden and Saizen went out to meet the girl, who apologized to them for the late visit. Once inside, she admitted she had suspected something was amiss and had come here on a hunch. Since Angelica had been studying maps of the region instead of hosting lavish parties, Sylvia concluded that she was forming an alliance. The girl wanted us to reveal the whole plan, but Eden insisted we weren't planning anything. He casually explained that he was only here because he had been kicked out of the temple and happened to find a job. But Sylvia didn't believe a word of it. She wanted to know the truth. She decided to show her hand first, saying she wouldn't interfere with any of the ladies' plans. Sylvia bluntly admitted she hated the Emperor because, in his eyes, everyone was nothing more than a plaything. What was an amusing pastime for him was a painful scream she had to carry for the rest of her life. So, if Angelica wanted to stab the Emperor in the back, Sylvia was willing to throw herself into it at any cost. She knew that, The only one who could defeat him was Her Majesty the Empress. When Eden pointed out that Angelica had a soft spot for Rhaenyra, she laughed out loud, saying she could never love him. According to her, the Empress might be flustered and rely on him for strength, but her sweet words were just a survival tactic. Eden thought that if that were true, the Emperor would have seen through her long ago, as he could spot a lie in an instant. Sylvia was convinced the Emperor had a blind spot for Angelica because he was smitten with her. Eden suddenly dropped a bombshell, saying he and the Empress were planning to escape from Actilus. She asked him what would happen after that, and he just smiled and said that the Emperor must be killed. Cuddled up in bed, Angelica told Rhaenyra she loved him while asking if she could leave for a while during his campaign. She was afraid that after he left, she would have nightmares and no one would wake her, so she wanted to go to a place to recuperate. The Empress had even chosen a place, Decino County, where Countess Anastasia would take care of her. Rhaenyra thought the Empress was an absolute sweetheart, and he wanted to give her everything she asked for. Sitting in the conference room, the Emperor couldn't focus on the discussion, his mind just replaying Angelica's love confession over and over. He announced that the original battle plan remained unchanged and dismissed the meeting. Rhaenyra remembered Nerima's pregnancy and asked the Duke about it, who was shocked that the Emperor wanted to speak with him privately. The Emperor asked the Duke if he was happy about it, if he loved his wife, and how exactly he knew it was love. It was a tricky question, but since it wasn't every day one had the chance to speak one-on-one with the Emperor, the Duke decided to avoid any topic that might displease him. He said that he felt love when he saw his wife as a truly special person. Love makes you forgive the unforgivable and become tolerant of things you might not like. From this, Rhaenyra deduced that the Empress saw him as an exceptional and unique being. When the Emperor caught up with Angelica, she was practicing archery. He embraced her, kissed her, and praised her for her great improvement in archery. He was worried if Angelica would be all right after he left, but she reassured him. It turned out the Emperor had already planned to send an escort to make her journey easier. Angelica only brought Sylvia, Sison, and a porter, feeling more comfortable with familiar faces around. She knew Rhaenyra would definitely have someone follow her, but she thought it would be fine as long as they kept their distance. The weather was getting colder, but the army of Actilus was well equipped for a surprise attack on Sambia. Before the Actilus army set out, Angelica had already left, having completed her preparations to go recuperate. She said goodbye to Rhaenyra, and, after getting into the carriage, the girls set off for Decino County. After seeing her off, the Emperor had to step up his actions, as he had decided to conquer Sambia. The Countess was thrilled by the Empress's arrival, and although the Duchess of Nerima had warned her not to act rashly, she could hardly contain her excitement. The Countess's husband was a chronic cheater, and her son had moved to another region, tired of his parents' marital quarrels. If it weren't for the fact that she owned an emerald mine, her father-in-law would have kicked her out of the house long ago. Having such a guest gave her something to show off. The Countess wanted to tell everyone in the county that the Empress was visiting, but the Empress was here to rest. The woman tried to get closer to Angelica without making her feel strange. The Empress was given the best of everything, and the staff was trained to the highest standards to avoid mistakes. Angelica was very satisfied with the treatment she received, and Anastasia was excited to be able to please her. She wondered who this man who came with them was, as she only knew that Sison had hired him and his name was Daniel. Judging by the fact that he could accompany this trip, he must have quickly earned great trust. The Countess and Daniel's eyes kept meeting, and when she caught him smiling, she became flustered and her face turned red. As it turned out, seducing the Countess, who had been living a lonely life since her husband's affair, was part of Angelica's plan. Mission accomplished. Later that night, Daniel appeared in the Countess's bedroom, and she was completely captivated by his attentiveness. After she fell asleep, he quietly opened her dresser drawer and found the key he had been looking for all along. The next morning, the Countess discovered the key was missing and suddenly realized that Daniel might have been the thief last night. She was about to run and confront him, but the Empress came out, saying she had something to talk to her about. Anastasia tried to put her off, saying she had an urgent matter, but then Angelica produced the keys. According to the Empress, she had dropped the keys when taking off her coat yesterday, but didn't say anything at the time to avoid embarrassing her. The Countess didn't remember bringing the keys yesterday, but the empress wouldn't have stolen them, so she thanked the empress. Angelica suggested they have tea together before lunch, and the countess accepted with honor. The empress chose this county as her escape route for several reasons. First, it was located north of the capital, so she could reach the Tunian temple without having to cross mountains. Second, although Anastasia was wealthy, her family's position was unstable, so she would do anything Angelica asked in order to gain influence through her. During tea, the empress complained to the countess that there were too many unfamiliar people in the manor, making her dizzy. To please her, the countess told her there was a quiet villa nearby where her majesty could stay. In fact, Saizen and Eden had already selected this villa on the edge of the estate as their escape point before they arrived. Although staying in this villa had always been Angelica's plan, she still felt a bit awkward watching the countess try so hard to curry favor with her. When the countess proposed deploying guards around the house, the empress refused her, saying she was a divine archer herself. If the countess agreed to let the empress stay in the villa with only her retinue, she promised to grant the countess one wish. Angelica liked that the villa was far from the manor and had a fence so high that it was almost impossible to see inside. Now all the empress had to do was ask the countess to respect her need for privacy and hand over the keys to the villa. Finally, it was just the four of them, and Angelica noticed that Sylvia seemed unusually excited. The empress was very worried because Eden had included Sylvia in the escape plan without even consulting her first. After confirming that everything was still on track, they sat down to relax. Angelica thought to herself how difficult it was for her to lie every day. After the empress left, Raniero kept going to her palace. The staff said he spent every night there, and they began to worry if he was okay. Before leaving this place tonight, Angelica had something to ask of Saizen. She needed him to get her some stationery so she could write a letter to the emperor. In the letter, she said she had arrived safely in the county, was not having nightmares here, and would recover soon. Angelica said that once His Majesty's expedition was over, she wanted to go back and continue her training to prepare for the upcoming hunt. Reading her letter, Raniero thought that after he conquered Sambia, he would make a detour to pick up Angelica on his way back to the capital. Eden said that moving as a group of four was too conspicuous, so they had to split into two teams. He and the empress would head north first, and a week later Sylvia and Saizen would head south. While packing, Angelica was terrified that something would go wrong, that she would be recognized, and the plan would be exposed. Seeing her worried, Saizen comforted her, saying that they would surely be reunited at the temple soon. Angelica hugged her loyal aide, to whom she had never, even now, confessed that she was not who she seemed to be. The empress mounted her horse, and Sylvia confirmed if she was really sure she could handle everything. Angelica wished the ladies-in-waiting good luck, and then she and Eden set off. The closer they got to the checkpoint, the more nervous the empress became, and eventually they arrived. Angelica felt sick with stress, but Eden didn't slow down at all. The guard who stopped them demanded to see their pass, and they handed over the tokens stolen from the countess. Eden told the guard that he and his wife were merchants, traveling from south to north to care for his sick mother. But the guard sneered, saying not to take him for a fool, as merchants don't have such fair and beautiful faces. Angelica found it strange that the guy didn't arrest them on the spot, or call for backup. She decided to interject, praising the guard for his diligence in serving the interests of Actilus late at night. Angelica had gotten rid of most of her jewelry, fearing it would expose her, but she had kept a gold bracelet, which she just handed to the guard. The guy bit the metal to confirm its authenticity, and once certain, he waved them through. As soon as they passed the checkpoint, Angelica burst into tears and told Eden not to look back. He didn't know why she was so upset or whether he should comfort her, but she just told him to keep moving forward. They rode into a field full of glowing flowers, and both of them froze for a moment, stunned by the beauty. For a moment, Eden thought the empress was crying again, but when he turned around, he saw her laughing. The sight brought her such a huge sense of relief that she couldn't suppress her emotions. All her recent days had been a desperate struggle for survival. Angelica had been constantly trying to evade disaster, staying vigilant, never daring to let her guard down. But now it didn't matter if she screamed or ran, because for the first time, she felt completely free. Meanwhile, a servant sent by the countess knocked on the villa door to check on the empress. He brought a package for Angelica, but Saizen took the basket and sent the unexpected visitor away. Sylvia was pleased with the visit, as it meant no one knew the Empress and Eden had left the villa last night. The decision to leave a week's interval between their departures was to create an alibi for the Empress. After all, when the ladies-in-waiting were seen at the villa, people would naturally assume she was there too. But when the ladies-in-waiting disappeared, it would be impossible to determine exactly when Angelica's party had left the county, which would cause confusion in the search. While resting on the road, the Empress worried about meeting Serafina, but Eden told her not to be nervous. He also advised her to try not to think about Raniero, because if she still had any feelings for him, that night could be painful. Sitting by the campfire, Angelica suddenly sensed someone approaching and told Eden to check his weapon. He was startled and asked her how she knew, just as the Empress, who had drawn her bow, was attacked. Without hesitation, the girl shot down one of the attackers, who turned out to be their leader. Eden took down another with his sword, but misjudged his swing, and the blade got stuck too deep. He couldn't pull out. The guy's arm was cut, but Angelica covered him, and she took down that attacker as well. After dealing with the thugs, she bandaged Eden's arm, and he asked with a look of amazement, "How on earth did you know they were coming?" It seemed that spending so much time in Actalis had honed Angelica's intuition to the extreme. Although they hadn't gotten a proper rest, they decided to hurry on to the temple. Meanwhile, the Countess had been consistently rebuffed by the Empress on the grounds of being unwell. Although Sylvia and Saizen had the extra pass stolen by Eden, they didn't go through the checkpoint, but instead snuck through a loophole path used by the locals. When it came to bribes, Saizen was not stingy, so the search party would be hot on their trail, thinking that only the Empress could be so lavish with money. Raniero dreamed that Angelica confessed her love to him and woke up terrified because he never dreamed. He could feel the devil whispering in his ear, telling him to forget everything except war, blood, and screams. Although the column was moving slower than the march to the Tunian temple, His Majesty's army was still advancing purposefully. The soldiers' morale was now at an all-time high, as they had been eager to conquer the lands of Sambia. It was this slow advance that made them even more brutal. Raniero was certain that once the battle began, they would crush the enemy forces. The devil was pleased with this, because away from Angelica, the Emperor was starting to listen to him again. The Duchess of Nerima learned of the Countess's visit and was angry because Anastasia was supposed to be hosting the Empress. In the drawing room at that moment, she found a frantic woman shouting that both she and the Duchess had been tricked. The Countess spilled everything, telling how the Empress had asked to borrow her villa, and then disappeared. Nerima felt a wave of fear, as she knew how much the Emperor cherished his wife, and anyone associated with her disappearance would be wiped off the map. She composed herself, told the Countess to calm down, and decided to handle everything before the Emperor returned. Anastasia speculated that Angelica had left the county long ago, even though the Empress's disappearance was only discovered this morning. After hearing her account, Nerima decided to check all passes, as the fugitives might have forged documents. She also ordered an investigation into the illegal road used by the poor. Angelica and Eden continued on, but the weather was very gloomy, and he worried it might start to snow. The Empress thought they would be fine, and this time, Eden didn't hesitate to trust her intuition. The girl had been feeling like someone was whispering in her ear, and following these directions had made their journey easier. Following the voice again, heading in the direction it indicated, they saw an abandoned house before them. After going in and looking around, the travelers found no one inside and decided to spend the night in the house. Eden went to find some firewood to start the stove and asked Angelica to tie up the horses in the meantime. Under this roof, warming themselves by the stove, the girl began to feel a sense of peace. Eden started talking about her past life, and he was surprised that she could barely even remember her real name. Angelica reminded him that her past wasn't smooth sailing either, but she was also running from her present life, because here she couldn't be sure of anything. Eden confessed to her, admitting that he was indeed from a rich family, just as she had guessed. Angelica laughed and asked him if he was confessing all this just to show off. Eden suddenly leaned in close, asking if a promise of financial assistance would give her the confidence to go back. He relayed Sylvia's words, saying that Angelica didn't love the Emperor and had chosen him only for protection. Perhaps those words hit a nerve, because after coming here, she had done everything in her power to avoid angering Raniero, just to survive. And after winning his heart and finally living a normal life, she had constantly manipulated him, avoiding anything she didn't want to do. Eden leaned into Angelica, holding her cheeks in his hands, and asked if she would really be okay if Rhaenyra died. As he expected, she found it hard to answer the question. Perhaps it was her survival instinct at work, but she was sure his death would not make her happy. However, Angelica didn't think she would cry her eyes out and mourn him all day either. Although his face always appeared in her mind during these conversations, it was only because she still had some attachment issues. But when she finally overcame those emotions and escaped from Actilus, the sense of relief was incredibly real. I mean, the nightmare that had been binding her disappeared the day she left. This was the 17th day since they escaped from the Decino villa. The weather was getting worse, but they were almost there. Eden worried they would be late and might run into the Emperor at the temple. But a voice surrounding Angelica whispered to her that it wouldn't happen. Her legs had given out, and she couldn't walk anymore. So Eden picked her up because they couldn't stop now. Finally, cold and exhausted, they reached the Tunian temple and went inside. The archbishop who greeted them asked Eden what had happened and why he had returned. Angelica reminded the bishop who she was and told him about their escape from Actilus. She fell to her knees, pleading with the servant of God for mercy, a place to sleep, and some food. Eden tried to wake the empress, but she had collapsed on the floor, completely unconscious. She suddenly realized she was thinking of Rhaenyra's face again and didn't understand why, because she was truly afraid of him. But scenes of memories flashed before her eyes, and she passed out. When Angelica woke up, she was completely disoriented because the temple room she had stayed in with Rhaenyra looked different. The door opened, and Seraphina stood there with a tray of food, explaining that this was her room. Meanwhile, at the foot of the mountains near the Sambian border, the Imperial army was stalled by bad weather. Rhaenyra decided to turn back, but they might run out of supplies, so they would have to make a stop at the Tunian temple on the way. After feeding Angelica, Seraphina was curious how the girl had trekked through the snow and ice for 17 days. The saintess asked the empress to explain why she had fled from Actilus. It was supposed to be Eden and Seraphina talking, but he was now unconscious, and Angelica asked if he had spoken with the saintess. Seraphina admitted she was confused by the man, because the man who had once despised her was suddenly kicked out of the temple for confessing his love to her. She felt it couldn't be a coincidence, because a few months later, he returned to the temple with the empress. That's why Seraphina hadn't been able to see Eden. She was scared and frustrated. As she had expected, unlike what she had read in the novel, the emotions of the people around her felt completely different to Angelica. She finally decided to briefly tell Seraphina that the Emperor of Actilus would soon arrive at the temple. Suddenly starting to choke up and terrified of what she was about to say, Angelica pleaded with the saintess to kill him. The girl trembled all over, Rhaenyra's gentle voice echoing in her mind as she begged Seraphina for mercy. The saintess of Tunia told her to calm down, but Angelica said, "No, this is in your best interest too." But she couldn't bring herself to blurt out that Rhaenyra would try to ruin and destroy Seraphina. So she just said it was for Eden's sake. When asked how she knew all this, Angelica divulged the secret of the book of prophecy she had found in the shrine. The imperial princess took the book from her bag and showed it to the saintess, warning her that only she could read what was inside. Seraphina opened the book and saw with her own eyes that the pages were actually blank. Angelica said that Eden also knew of the prophecy, as according to it, he was destined to die at Rhaenyra's hands. Seraphina was dumbfounded by what she heard, but the imperial princess understood that it was certainly hard to accept. Angelica also revealed that according to the prophecy, she would die first. To the imperial princess's surprise, the saintess remained composed, saying she believed her and was very sorry for her plight. Angelica lay on her bed, pondering Seraphina's reaction, because even though the saintess had shown understanding, something felt wrong. Stepping out of the temple to face the crowd, Seraphina announced that the emperor's great army would soon arrive. Tunia had already received help from Rhaenyra, and now they could not ignore those who needed aid in this storm. The people were terrified, but everything the saintess said was essentially treated as holy scripture. They were trying to figure out how to house the army. After seeing Seraphina address the populace, Eden realized she had finally made her move. Rhaenyra knocked on the great gates of the temple, and the archbishop told him that they had been awaiting his arrival. Angelica sat in the prayer room, which was forbidden to all, and heard the commotion outside, knowing the emperor had arrived. Ever since being locked in this prayer room, All she could think about was for Rhaenyra to leave as soon as possible. But 3 days had passed, and he was still here. No one had entered the room, but a tray of food was always left by the door. According to the original plot, the two of them should have had their fateful meeting by now, and Angelica couldn't understand why he was still lingering here. Suddenly, the prayer room door was flung open. The girl jumped, thinking it was Seraphina returning, but it was Eden. He was furious when he discovered the saintess hadn't appeared here for 3 days. Where on earth had she gone? Eden wanted to go look for her, but Angelica grabbed his arm and begged him to stay. She asked if the Emperor was still here. He clutched his head, saying that things had changed and Rhaenyra still hadn't met Seraphina. Eden believed the saintess, who was supposed to greet the Emperor at the temple, was intentionally avoiding him. He had to change his plan. He needed to get to the sanctuary before Seraphina took out Rhaenyra. 10,000 soldiers were stationed in Tunia and its surrounding villages, living and eating in the homes of the populace. When the archbishop said they simply could not care for everyone, the emperor threw a bag of gold coins onto the ground. But the people here made their living through trade, making gold worthless to them. Rhaenyra knew this and was doing it deliberately. In any case, if Seraphina killed the emperor and left the soldiers leaderless, they would raze the place to the ground. So he and Angelica had to leave before that could happen. Eden told her to focus on just 2 things for now: the blood of Actylos and the sword of Tunia. Suddenly, he quieted Angelica as he sensed someone was nearby. Rhaenyra emerged from around the corner, thinking he had heard his wife's voice.